Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Lynn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Good morning, and welcome to this morning's episode of Ethical Perspectives on the News. I'm Martha Rogers, and I'm so thankful you're with us for some exploration of very current topics this day. You know, with increasing frequency, we're seeing individuals and maybe even institutions claiming a right to discriminate. They're refusing to provide services to women, LGBT people, and it seems that they're basing a lot of these possible discrimination situations on religious objections, and it takes a lot of form. Schools are firing women who are pregnant yet unwed, and business owners are not providing insurance coverages for contraception, and pharmacies are turning away women who want birth control, and it goes on. And in the news lately, we've heard about bakers and bridal salons and photo studios saying that they're going to close their doors to same-sex couples because it interferes with their religious freedoms. Boy, I don't understand it all, and I'm here to learn this morning because it just seems to me that religion's being used to harm other people, and that's nothing new. Back in the 1960s, we saw institutions object to laws requiring integration in restaurants because they really believed that God wanted things to remain separate. They thought God wanted segregation. And we saw a religiously affiliated university not admit students who were engaged in interracial dating back in those days. But this wasn't about violating religious liberty as the claims are today. It was about ensuring fairness, and I think we need to go back to that question. What is fair? But we have a lot of exploring to do in the next half hour, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to this morning's panel, who are the experts in the subject, I hope. They'll help us explore religious freedom and business, and I'd like to introduce them to you right now. Seated next to me is Jason Wasson. Welcome, Jason. He's a local small business owner in our area. And next to Justin, not Jason, excuse me, I can't read my own writing. And seating next to Justin is Dave O'Brien, an attorney with the Dave O'Brien Law Firm in town. And seated next to Dave is Steve Moshier, chair of the Marion Civil Rights Commission. Welcome to all three of you, and thank you for participating on this panel this morning. That's a big subject area. You know, I think we're all aware of the baker who in Des Moines lost their business or decided to close their business because they wouldn't make a wedding cake. Where do we start? What's this religious freedom all about, and what's the role of businesses with this? We're protected by the First Amendment, and we're supposed to serve all people if we own a business, but I'll throw it out there. Justin, you're a small business owner. How do you decide who you serve and don't serve?
Sure. For me personally, and I guess I might as well start, first of all, thank you, Martha, for giving me the opportunity to be here tonight, or this morning, I suppose. It'll be morning when we play this. But what I want to start off with is, as a small business owner, I took a lot of risk. I really took a lot of risk to start my own business, to provide a quality service, to really go above and beyond to have happy customers. And what I really believe is that if a person of religious belief starts a business, that religious belief should not be expected to go away just because they've started that business, just because they open their doors to the public. I believe that a person should be able to follow their religious beliefs regardless of whether they're a business owner or not.
You know, I've seen that be really good for business at times. I've seen
Absolutely.
People who are kind to customers because of their faith, and I've seen people who go above board and give a break to customers, but it can backfire too, and I bet, Dave, as a lawyer, you've seen cases where it might be the opposite of what I'm speaking to.
Well, the thing you have to keep in mind is that when you have a case, which we're referring to, like the baker that was refusing to make a cake for a gay wedding, you have to look at the very specifics of the case, and it has to be decided on the specific factual circumstances that are presented. And there were a lot of things. I read that case, as a matter of fact, in preparation for this event, because I hadn't looked at it all that closely before. And I had more questions than answers about this person's background, because they were arguing, and they, like you just said, I mean, you know, they had a truly strongly held religious belief, and the question was, could they extend that religious belief such that they didn't have to bake a cake for a gay couple because they were opposed to homosexual marriage? And the questions that I had that weren't answered in the case were, well, what other religious beliefs do you have, and do you follow those in terms of customers that you serve? For example, if you're a Christian that didn't believe, or a Catholic, for example, that didn't believe in divorce, did you make wedding cakes for people that were being married for the second or third or fourth time? Or if you believe that any sex outside of a marriage was wrong, did you check to make sure that the people that you were making a wedding cake for were virgins?
So you're looking
beforehand?
for consistency in providing
and
the
I
service?
think each of those cases, they have to look at the consistency of what the person's belief. But if they do have a truly strongly held belief that they are expressing consistently, I think their case is much stronger. That doesn't necessarily mean they win, but their case is much stronger than if they simply are just getting excited about one particular hot button issue and deciding they're going to follow their religious belief in that case, and not necessarily so much in other cases.
Well, I think that's how the Hobby Lobby case, which I know just a little bit about with insurances, that's how they won their case, was because they could prove they closed on Sundays due to their faith. They had certain hiring practice due to their religious faith and practices. So they had practiced it over the years. They just didn't make a on-the-spot decision, so to say.
I think that's right. A couple of other factors involved in Hobby Lobby. I think its applicability will be limited because it was for closely held corporations and this family that solely owned this business. And then also, it was not actually, the decision wasn't issued based upon First Amendment religious freedom grounds. It was based on an interpretation of the Religious Restoration Act that was passed by Congress in early 1990s. And so its constitutional validity, it may not have much precedential value, but certainly it's going to give a lot of people pause when they're trying to decide what they can advise businesses in terms of whether they have to perform a service for somebody that is engaged in some act that they find morally objectionable.
Steve, as a member and chair of the Civil Rights Commission, how does the commission look at situations, as we're talking, with individual business owners and businesses that have religious freedom versus customers that also have religious freedoms or lifestyles? Does the Civil Rights Commission speak to any of this, or?
Well, and Dave was right on several facts on this part, is that when you look at a case individually, part of your investigation is see what their practices, their business practices are, and how committed they are to that, and understanding that when you open your doors, you don't necessarily have a legal right to discriminate unless you can show if there is some religious accommodation that has been afforded to you or to a group. Then you look at it in those terms. There's a lot of things to consider. And part of the investigation is that the investigator is going to flush out all that information. They're not just going to say, because Johnny or Sally is part of a protected group, that they automatically side with them. They're going to look at it from both sides to make a determination about how things are. And if you, as David said, if you make that strong commitment to your religious faith, then they're going to look at that very seriously.
When I was preparing for this panel, I saw examples of what you speak of, all three of you, and one of the words that came up was substantial burden, that a business owner has to prove there's a substantial burden on them in order to claim religious freedom. Can you help me unpack that, Justin? Do you find that you have to park your religious faith at the door to serve customers, or do you have to prove to people that you would be burdened in order to withhold a service from someone? This is all new to me.
Sure. You know, when performing business, I think it's important really to take everything, you know, just even how you take a case-by-case basis for discrimination. I mean, taking every piece of business that I do, I take case by case. When I go out and bid a job, if I don't want to do work, if I do want to do work, maybe I don't want to do it because I don't like the person for whatever reason. Maybe I really want to do the work, and I'll give them a discount. I'm actually giving, right now I'm doing a lot of free work for churches and other religious buildings in town because I see value in that. But I think what we can do is really stress the positives that come with religion. I think the Golden Rule is a great example to follow. I think if every business followed the Golden Rule, they're going to be successful. If you treat your customers how you want to be treated, you're gonna do successful in business. And I think I really think the place for religion in business it can really be held by the owner. I mean, the owner directs the course of the company, and if that owner is very strongly religious, I think they should absolutely follow their faith. And I know legally that might not be the best advice, but I also think that from a personal standpoint, we can't take away a person's beliefs just because they start a business.
And I agree with that, but can a person's faith then get in the way of providing the service that they've opened the business to provide to people?
I think it absolutely can. And this is just me personally, I don't do that. I don't discriminate because of a person's orientation or gender or race or my beliefs. I don't believe that's right, but that's my beliefs. And I don't think that we should be dictating to other business owners that their beliefs are wrong or incorrect just because they're not my beliefs.
It gets to be a real slippery slope, though. Mm-hmm. And that's the problem. The idea that in public accommodation, people that have chosen to open a business, the notion that they cannot discriminate against individuals even though they might claim religious freedom as a basis for that discrimination, that has not been that's a notion that has been disallowed in this country for quite a few years. And it was reaffirmed in a 1990 Supreme Court decision written by Justice Scalia. So it was not a liberal principle. It was talking about, if you allow anyone that has sincerely held religious beliefs, and there certainly are a lot of us, and we have to respect them as much as we can, but if you allow anyone to say that they can avoid following whatever law they choose to based upon their religious beliefs, even if it is truly held, then no law is necessarily applicable to anyone. There could always be an exception. And that becomes real problematic. Now again, it gets difficult when you start talking about actual specific facts. The principle that you can't discriminate on public accommodation is well established. And then we get into trouble and issues and these tough cases where you start talking about exceptions to that and on what basis. And it gets to be quite a hairy legal issue.
Yeah, I can imagine, because I can see it happening in medical fields and general services to families and such, and with race issues and gender issues in the past, it seems to pretty much has been solved that we will serve all people and do no harm. But now it seems that sexual orientation is the subject that businesses are using as their right to have religious freedom. And to me, those things clash.
I agree with that. They do. And part of the real crutch of this thing is that if you provide service to a gay couple, does not necessarily mean that you are advocating their practice. What you're doing is that you're doing a good business sense. You're in the business of making money and providing a service. Now, if you all of a sudden separate 2 or 3 people out and say, I'm not going to serve them, but I'm going to serve these other folks, well, that isn't a good business practice, because you should be looking at getting the optimum amount of customers to produce the greatest amount of revenue that you can to increase your profit margin. Now, when you start singling people out because, well, I don't like the way that Johnny looks, or he's left-handed, or he has blue eyes, or that, then you're cutting into what would be your business because of a personal held belief that really is not that deeply rooted in religion. It's something that you have, because I'm looking at it, and you said the golden rule and all that, but that says to treat others like you'd like to treat yourself. So if I'm sitting there and wondering, well, maybe one of my workers might be able to decorate that cake. I may not do it because I object to it, but I might have somebody employed that would do that. So why would you cancel out the entire business option?
Why would you narrow down your opportunities to make money
Right.
and to serve customers and
Right.
all else?
When
that
somebody
goes?
else might be able to do that for you.
And I think one of the things, though, is that, I mean, we're not talking about discrimination at a broad base. We're talking about it from a religious perspective, and particularly when it comes to marriage. I mean, that seems to be the real hot issue right now. You know, a wedding cake for a marriage ceremony for a gay couple. I mean, it's really, a lot of these hot issues right now revolve around marriage, which, in my opinion, ought to strictly be a religious process. I don't think the government should be involved with the religious process of marriage, but that's a personal opinion.
Right, and the Supreme Court has already solved that for businesses in saying that all marriages are equal. So it's the services provided to those seeking marriages that are being denied, I think.
Right, you're denying a group of people the full benefits of being a citizen of your society. And in doing that, you're discriminating in some respect. And if you allow for religious accommodation, there still is a form of discrimination involved in that. But you have to have a well-held belief that you are, like David said, and I believe you have said as well, that you've practiced. And you look at who you hire, you look at who you serve, but you have to justify that to a point of why you're denying somebody the benefit of your service.
Well, and I think I would just point out the difference, and I think I agree with you when you're talking about a religious marriage, and certainly nothing about the Supreme Court's decision in gay marriages requires any religion
Right.
to recognize a gay marriage, and that's, I don't think there's any dispute about that. Then the other side of it is, because in order to get married, of course, you have to get a marriage license, a government-issued certificate allowing you to get married, and that's where they've said we cannot discriminate against people based upon their sexual orientation. And so I do think I agree wholeheartedly with you said from the religious standpoint, but to the extent that you breach over into the civil part of this, which a marriage can have a religious aspect but doesn't necessarily have to, and to the extent that it's the civil part of it, I think you get into a little more difficulty. But just to play devil's advocate here a little bit, because we're talking about the wedding cake thing, you know, let's posit a factual scenario that perhaps gets us a little closer to some disagreement. What if the people that want the wedding cake have asked for some sort of decoration on it that is probably closer to a bachelor party type thing, where it might be morally objectionable for a lot of other people, not just because it has gay themes, but because it includes some other innuendos or whatever, and a baker might refuse to do that. Now where are we at? Is it because of the lewdness of the request for the cake, or is it because of the underlying, perhaps the baker that has an underlying dislike of a gay marriage? And I think that becomes a closer call, a lot closer call.
And that's where you would have to look at the consistency of the behavior of the baker to say, is it because of my religious values I don't like either of those situations? Or is it just because it's in poor taste? Or am I just against a certain issue of sexual orientation? It is a hard line to walk, and I worry, is religious freedom good for businesses in that way, or is business good for religious freedom? Which way does it turn?
Well, I think there's probably another way to look at it in a certain aspect. Can the two coexist in this same sphere? Can you have the religious belief, and can you still do good business? And I don't know if we've really tackled that yet, because I mentioned earlier about maybe there's somebody on your staff that could perform that task that it's not that objectionable to. But you have to look at things to be able to reach compromise, because the other individual who's trying to get that service, they are trying, this is what they feel that helps them enjoy the benefits of being a member of your society. To include them into this neighborhood that you have, and the sanctity of if you're looking at marriage, whether it's on the civil or religious, and granted that it's been decided on the civil aspect, but they want to enjoy that. And now you're preventing them from doing that. Now let's just take this. What if you're the only baker in town? Where am I going to go to get that? I don't have another choice if I was that individual to be able to get that wedding cake. I only had one choice if you're the only baker. So what do? Now I'm denied that aspect of fulfilling my desire to express whatever, love, all love is equal regardless of who it's from, right? And I can't express that because you've denied me that opportunity.
So would you say on that point that religious freedom would not be something to use that as an excuse not to provide? That if you're the only baker in town, you have an obligation to serve the entire town?
I would think in that respect, but it's still part of a slippery slope on being able to do that. There are some things that you have to allow, being the only baker in town. And somebody who's deeply religious is going to tell you that any lewd things is not going to happen in my bakery. You tell them right up front.
Yeah, but then you get on that slope again of what's lewd. How do you define?
But as long as they draw that across the line, regardless of who, and then I think they have a better footing. Not necessarily that they have a steady foot, but it's a better footing.
Goes back to the facts of the case, and the baker that objects to doing a lewd cake that they find to be a lewd cake for a gay wedding better not have a history of doing lewd cakes for bachelor parties and bachelorette parties of heterosexual marriages, because if they start, their argument really loses much of its value at that point.
And we're really drawing a fine line in this sort of loaded topic where, I mean, what's lewd to you might not be lewd to me, and vice versa. What the two male figures or two female figures might be lewd to an individual. I mean, from a personal standpoint, I don't believe it is, but I guarantee you there are many people that would. And especially from a religious perspective, we're really dancing that fine line right now and trying to figure out what is and what is not
I'm right with
really
you.
acceptable.
And what's the bottom line? What's at stake here? Is it religious freedom? Is it discrimination? Is it a combination of both? What is it that we're after?
Well, lewdness, like beauty, may well be in the eye of the beholder, but if a baker is going to refuse on the grounds of lewdness of baking a cake that has two male figures for the wedding, they're probably not going to be in very good shape from a legal perspective if they've made cakes in the past that had a woman and a man as figures in cakes. In the exact same posture and so on, assuming all the other matters are equal. So I do, when you're talking about your religious freedom, I think the first thing you better do is make sure that it really is something that is morally objectionable to you and that you've been consistent on. And once you reach that point, then I think you do have a right to claim that there are certain things that you don't have to do. But when you open a business and give things out there for public accommodation, you're going to run into some trouble on those issues.
The religious freedom restoration laws that they tried to get through said it had to be a substantial burden on the business. It's not just I disagree because of my religious views, but this is a substantial burden that I can't provide the service for. And I think that maybe is the bottom line. What is the burden to the business owner? And how does it prohibit you more than just my faith doesn't allow me? I think you have to prove it goes deeper, and we've talked about that this morning, about consistency, about looking at it from other angles. So it's a hard one, and it has to be a case-by-case call, I would imagine. It goes back to Justin's do no harm, do the golden rule, treat others as you would want to be treated, and don't slam the door in anyone's face.
Particularly in today's society. I mean, I think, when you do see acts of what's often considered as discrimination, I mean, you see a big whiplash from the community. You really do. I mean, we've got a baker who lost their business. We've got a chapel in Iowa that had to close down its wedding ceremonies at the chapel because of their religious beliefs. And I mean, I think what we're seeing is a lot of community reaction to some of these incidents
And the business
and
owner
the
has the choice to close down.
And a lot
or
of
to
times the
continue.
community is speaking, which I think is often more powerful than perhaps the courts speaking on it.
Well, you make a good point, though, Martha, because you know, if you find something so morally objectionable you can't do it, you know, you do have a choice, and you can close your business and not open it up to public accommodation.
Is that what the bakery in Des Moines did? I thought I heard that they chose to close their doors rather than remain open and be forced in that kind of rock and a hard place on their faith values.
Well, and I respect them if that is in fact the decision they made, if that's how they believe it. We said we weren't going to talk about this necessarily, but it goes right back down to Kim Davis, that's elected clerk to issue marriage licenses and refusing to do so. I mean, I have no sympathy for her whatsoever because there's a very simple answer. If you feel morally compelled to take the position you're taking, then resign from office.
And
It's
I
not that
think
big of a
that's a
risk.
whole nother half-hour
It is.
taping, as much as I would enjoy getting into
It
that
is.
subject. And I think we only have a few minutes left. So this morning, where do we end? What would we like our viewers to take away from this in the last 2 minutes that we have?
I'll go. We need to look at tolerance and acceptance. When you open a business and you decide that you want to interact with the public, you have to take some other things in consideration. Besides, if this is your religious belief, I thought that tolerance and acceptance was a big part of that. And if you are looking at somebody differently and deciding, I'm not going to serve them, well, does that take us back in time? Because it's sure not pushing us forward.
Feels like Jim Crow all over to me
Yes.
with a different group of people.
Yes.
Well, there's an old notion in the law that, you know, my right to extend my arm ends at the tip of your nose. And I think that gets back to the notion of, are you using your basic religious belief as a shield to protect yourself, or are you using them as a spear to go after somebody else? And I think you're on a lot more solid legal grounds if you're using it as a shield than if you're using it as a spear.
Well, it sounds to me that takes like a lot of self-observation and a lot of knowledge of why you're in the business and why you're providing the service you are to know which way you're using it.
Well, that's right, and in your history would be very, very important in each specific factual case. Because, you know, the truth will come out if this is the first time you've decided all of a sudden that you're going to express religious values as part of your business. Whereas if you have a history of doing that, then I think you're on a lot stronger legal grounds.
How about you, Justin?
You know, we brought up tolerance, Stephen, and what I want to say is that tolerance is a two-way street. I mean, it's not just tolerance of your customers, but it's, to an extent, customers' tolerance of a business.
I agree.
And a business, I mean, customers have every right to choose their business, and I think business, to some extent, has a right to choose their customers, who they want to serve. And I mean, I personally believe that a business is going to have trouble being successful if they discriminate, especially in today's society. But I think we also need to be very tolerant of the people's beliefs. These people have started their own business, they've risked their own capital. Most small business owners I know work a lot of hours, and they work very hard. And it's not easy being a small business owner. And
you wouldn't want to see anything ruin that for them.
Absolutely.
Nor would you want to ruin for the customers.
And just like I said before, you know, the golden rule, treat others just like you want to be treated, and you will be successful in business.
And maybe that's where we'll end the program. We live under a government that has First Amendment rights to us to guarantee that the government won't interfere with our religion, but we have the right to have religion. And now how they work in business is how we're having this conversation. We thank you for joining us this morning, and we thank you to KCRG for sponsoring this program, and to the Lynn County Interreligious Society Council for sponsoring us. I'm Martha Rogers, and I'm reminding you to, whatever you do, live ethically.